Beacon pushed the remains of the pilots into a neat pile and evaporated them with his plasma, and then sat down, making himself comfortable at the command console. He watched the Marines outside run around like some headless fowl as they tried to force open the doors. Wasn't going to happen unless he let it. The whole point of the vessel was that it couldn't be taken while the Marines were busy boarding some other sorry bastard. He contemplated his route to the mesoclip, estimating he had around 4 hours before he was in full scanner range of the ship. Time to shut up the squeaking soldiers outside. He started by cutting off the grav plates throughout the ship, and then immediately put the ship into a spin. He sat comfortably as the G-forces built, passing beyond anything organic life could withstand, and gave it an hour, turning the ship into a blender. Outside, the soldiers were being flung at increasing speed into each other, into every wall and every fitment. He watched with interest until the cameras were blinded by spray. Then he turned the gravity back on and steadied the ship. Softly whistling, he released the defenses. The thick door swung open silently, leaving a smear across the floor. It was covered in scorch marks and dimples from weapons fire. He gazed at the new decorations that the corridors were coated with, mostly bits and blood. It wasn't exactly the personal approach that he preferred, but sometimes just making a mess would get his point across. He ambled through the ship, ensuring none of the bits could speak or move, taking the odd souvenir, until he was certain no one would be sending out any inconvenient signals. He burned off the mess currently sticking to his feet and concentrated on the next part of his plan. Silver Wisp had prepared for the service, organizing the witnesses and their requirements. Now he simply stood beside Rowan and readied himself. In front of him sat 3 altars, recovered from the wreckage of the world: stone, ice, and soil. They had been recovered by one of the witnesses, a human that had chosen naked space as its environment and disliked interiors. It felt this was a suitable demonstration of its grief and solidarity. Silver Wisp agreed. At Rowan's request, it was taking place in her quarters, and the soft green and gentle breeze seemed to gentle the mood. No one forgot that they were here on a mission of death and vengeance, but it reminded people of their better selves. The man that stood forward to conduct the service was tall, thin and gray-skinned, wrapped in a dark robe. He stood in front of the altars and paused, waiting for the conversation to dwindle. When he was satisfied with the quiet, he began, "Welcome to the family of man. I'm called Seek's Dark Places, and today is a dark day. I too spent my early life on a children's planet running with spears, hunting and rejoicing in our beginnings. My own children are doing so today. To see such a place so brutalized is a horror to all of us, but we cannot behave like children ourselves. I ask you to reach out to me and let us join in our grief. Our distaste for what we know must come and seek absolution from humanity itself." Silver Wisp closed his eyes and tried to center himself. Psionics wasn't something he ever dabbled in. He felt his own mind and motivations needed enough work without peering into other people's inner selves. Still, he felt a certain relief when the minds around him were joined and he found himself in the company of his peers. Once you stripped away all the alterations, he felt the humanity in the room in a way that mere appearances would never permit. The mesoclip was currently impatiently waiting for the Marine ship to arrive. The captain had been provided with the full, lurid, and confidential description of what had happened on the Haven of Fire, and the reassuring presence of a few hundred Marines might calm down his crew. And himself, if he had to be honest. He flinched at the memory of the celebrations on board after they had eradicated the humans. A battle with no consequences or risk. It had been a pleasure to use so many restricted systems, forbidden by tedious treaties, until they had been sent as the wrath of the goddess on the perverted creatures. Now it seemed they had an equally perverted guardian, and it was coming for his ship. He snapped at his comms officer. "Where are they? I want to speak to the Marine commander." The comms officer nodded. "Yes, sir. They're in comms range. Hailing now." The console started buzzing impatiently as Beacon returned from his walk. He grinned slightly. The mesoclip must be getting worried. He constructed a virtual environment and allowed the call. The comms officer simply saw the scowling face of the Marine commander that was currently smeared across 3 decks like jam. "What?" demanded Beacon. The comms officer stuttered slightly, surprised by the aggression. "Sir, the captain wishes to speak to you. Putting you through now." He hurriedly pushed the call to the captain's cabin with a sigh of relief. The bridge crew glanced at each other and pretended they had heard nothing. The captain was impatiently prowling his office, feeling the hot breath of a predator on his neck in a way that he hadn't in his adult life. It was the same fear that had driven his people to destroy the humans in the first place. He wanted guns, men, reassurance. Finally, he was face to face with his protector. "Commander, what is your status?" Beacon was rather enjoying the opportunity and opened his mouth in a sneer. "My what? Are you blind? Did you somehow miss my ship approaching, or did you forget your orders to maintain signal silence until I land?" He pushed his face closer. "I know you herbivores don't like to face some death ghost alone, but letting the whole system know you need a babysitter won't help your career, will it?" He pulled back. "I'll be on your ship in 2 hours. Shut up, sit down and wait until I get there to hold your hand. Tell your senior officers and staff to meet my ship. I don't want to repeat myself. Commander out." Beacon cut the call. That should do wonders for morale. The captain stood in front of the blank screen and gently deflated, his mouth working soundlessly. The service dispersed gently, everyone preoccupied with their own thoughts. Silver Wisp and Rowan remained with Seek's dark places and let them leave before he spoke. "The reality of war is never as simple as the idea of it," Rowan remarked. Silver Wisp nodded. "But it is not new to us, and I must make preparations." He turned to the seer. "Thank you, that was very helpful. Let me know if anything arises that I need to deal with." He bowed to Rowan and left. They watched him go. Rowan turned to the tall, gray seer. "So, your verdict?" I ask as one of the Quorum. "This is my war," she reminded him. He grasped her hand. "Then I will show you." The imagery was slightly strange, almost like a dream half remembered. The seer chimed in. "Your mind is interpreting things for you. I am simply sending the raw data." She closed her eyes and took the sense of a rough wind blowing through her branches, dark clouds and storms on the horizon. The smell of burning, the smell of dying trees and dead ground. The silent weeping and then the rage. She felt herself meld with her community, seeking blood payment for an atrocity. She felt the disciplined wrath of Silver Wisp stand out, driving the battle and unwilling to see the green places fall again. She saw the spear in his hand, his shield held high. She felt her people wrap themselves tightly around him, becoming a banner on the spear. A license. She opened her eyes and looked at the seer. "Thank you." She bowed and turned away. Citadel-class Marine 3008 requesting docking. The captain had remained in sullen silence until the ship arrived. He would have words with the commander on his terms, on his ship. He hadn't felt so humiliated since he had been a junior officer and crossed a senior NCO. He commanded a battleship. He went beyond the request of the Marine commander and filled the landing dock with his ship guards in full armor as well as his officers. He knew it was childish, but he still sent the orders. He also scanned the incoming craft until the paint on it started to blister. Then he decided to wait on his bridge and meet the insolent Marine from his command chair. Beacon had stepped off the Marine ship as soon as it had passed through the sensors. He chirped out the docking commands even as he made his way behind the assembled crew of the battleship, and then he waited. He really wanted to see this. The ship landed unmolested and unprotesting. The troops waited, wondering why they had been woken up and sent to the armory for this. It was just the Marines. Still, they held their ground. The silence drew out as no one opened the hatch. Some uncomfortable twitching and scratching filled the vast room. Nothing and nobody moved. The captain seethed. Obviously, the Marine commander was waiting for him to appear. He should have spoken up, but the damned creature had made his point about signal silence. He curtly nodded at his bridge staff and stomped off to meet the blasted soldier. The landing docks weren't particularly pretty. Utilitarian ramps and offices clumped into some sort of efficient machine. It did, however, have the military pomp that insists on a proper entrance for the captain. His personal guard hurried behind him as he marched to the hatch and waited. Nothing. Beacon grinned. The blood, and then the smell. That's what the crew remembered. As the captain had ordered the hatch open, a flood of gore had seeped out of the ship. They saw clumps, Then they saw the walls. They saw the captain begin to throw up as he tried to wave them away. Then the smell. A smell that filled the room and entered the vents, sharing it with the rest of the ship. The captain's guard grabbed him and began dragging him away, the second ordering them out and calling for medics. No one moved, held by the horror. Then they remembered that they were military, proud upholders of the Empire, and drew their weapons, ready for anything. Nearly anything. From the speakers set in the walls, from their personal comms, and from somewhere behind them came a slow clap. The cadence filled the room until everyone turned, searching for the cause. It seemed to come from the shadows that weren't supposed to be there. Someone thought to fire, or their trigger discipline was shot. It didn't matter as plasma flew into the dark corner someone had thought responsible. Mindlessly, they all fired until the clapping stopped. The poor office and its inhabitants were blown apart until some semblance of discipline returned. The frozen silence held until the NCOs started shouting and they were shuffled off the dock, out to spread horror amongst the rest of the crew. The medics had assured him that there would be no lasting side effects. It was simply shock. A few days' rest and some therapy and he would be fine. He stared at them. Rest? That monster is on my ship. The captain pulled himself away from the healers and began closing his uniform. He snarled at the doctors. What I need is information. What happened to my Marines? Silver Wisp let his mind settle. He had done all he could to reassure his peers that he wanted justice, not revenge. Although the difference wasn't going to be apparent to his enemies, he sealed the ship and blended with it, becoming his entire self. It was a relief to be whole again. He aimed at this council world, the primary target of his wrath. The council was a shouting match, starting with the report regarding Citadel-class Marine 3008 and working up from there. It was one ship. Now we know where this thing is, we can kill it. We all knew this was going sideways, and one battleship is going to end this, one way or another. I have assets in place that can destroy the whole damn system if we need to. Stop bitching about some Marines, Goddess knows they're no loss to the gene pool. That caused a sudden silence. Several members of the council had come from the Marines, and they didn't appreciate being treated as cannon fodder. The council member waved at them. I'm sorry, you know what I meant. They were dead on arrival. Whatever this creature is, used them as propaganda, another trick to terrify the fleet. I regret their loss as much as you do, but it changes nothing about the tactical situation. He paused and threw down the report. We can't even bury them properly, not with this. The council regarded the report. One section, in particular, was causing a lot of noise. It is with regret that we cannot assure the council that the Marines fell with honor. Through the misuse of ship systems, they have been reduced to what can only be described as pulp. Not content with simple murder, the alien continued the process until the remains of the dead were embedded or distributed throughout the ship. In our honest opinion, there is no further value in searching for a cause of death, and that declaring the ship an official graveyard for the crew might be more appropriate. And this creature is now on the mesoclip? What should we expect next? What new recordings will bleed into the fleet until we have no damn crew at all? The recriminations continued until a senior staffer walked carefully to the stickholder and whispered in his ear. Security measures not used in generations suddenly activated and the doors slammed shut. The very chamber itself began dropping hundreds of meters below the ground, an unfortunate event for all the decorative baubles and treasured portraits on the walls as they were suddenly ground to dust. Much of the furniture also fell loudly and shattered. The chairman stood, shaky as he was, and announced, "Council, we have an incursion into the system. We have reason to believe it is hostile." He paused for a moment as he tried to recall the words. "A vessel of some 10 kilometers in length and width has arrived in orbit. It is unknown to our security or intelligence community. I am awaiting more details." He sank into his seat and clutched the speaking stick. He nodded to the staffer. "Tell them." The staffer wasn't known to the rest of the council, but he spoke with a certain gravitas. He nodded. "A vessel, a sphere of some kind, has arrived and is currently sitting in low orbit over our world. Anything approaching, including the home fleet, has been destroyed. We have no intelligence on the species or the vessel." All we are receiving is a countdown, indicating it will make contact late tomorrow. I cannot recommend evacuation as nothing has been permitted to leave the atmosphere. I am here to answer any questions I can, although I believe that sums it up. Silver Wisp almost felt guilty as the dumb ships attacked. He appreciated the bravery, but it was outweighed by the sheer stupidity. It took a moment to extinguish the idiot machines and sit quietly in low orbit, particularly since a few warning shots had grounded anything leaving the planet. He kept an eye on his kill count, just to make sure he didn't ruin his introduction. The final images of the home fleet were played for the Council, the vastness of the alien vessel becoming suddenly real, the staffer's gentle monotone filling them in. It is a 10-kilometer sphere, although where it begins is uncertain. That was simply its footprint as it entered the system. It shows no weapons or propulsion. It left no track beyond its arrival here. All our ships that tried to engage it simply exploded with massive internal disruptions that bypassed every defense we have. It went straight through our shielding and we have no answer. If it chooses to, we will be dead tomorrow. What I need from you are orders for the rest of the Empire. Do we surrender? Do they fight on? Do we appoint a government on one of the colonies? These are questions you must answer tonight. Beacon watched the chaos spread through the ship. Tired, angry, and confused crewmen were handed weapons and told that the orders were to fire at will. They were even more confused. Free fire on a ship was just suicide with extra steps, and no one seemed to be in charge. The stories of the Haven of Fire and the Citadel were murmured. But this was a fucking battleship. The decent officers roused their men, posted watch, and rotated them out. But many dragged their men to choke points and then threw weapons and fear at them until it became dangerous to move about the ship. He decided to join in. He disguised himself as an ordinary crewman and approached one of the most disciplined watches. He held up his 4 limbs and crooned a simple tune until he was waved to the side. Apparently, they had forbidden crew to pass while carrying weapons. In a moment of sheer genius, their lieutenant had decided that he could simply hand them back once the crew had left his area and arranged runners to accomplish it. No one with a weapon was going through his area of responsibility, and it had worked. By the time any wandering soul had got through the checkpoints, his weapons were waiting at the exit. So far, he hadn't lost any of his crew to the fear currently filling the ship. That had to stop. At the first checkpoint, Beacon pulled out his knife. "Sorry, does this count?" The NCO looked at it and moved his hand to the trigger. "Drop it before I drop you." Beacon grinned and dropped it straight through the NCO's foot, and as it screamed, he grabbed the creature's gun, firing through the man and into his 2 crewmen before they could react. As he stood amongst the corpses, he picked up his knife and did his homework. He began whistling quietly, an old tune from the planet that these bastards had burned. He was probably the last person to know it, and that fed his anger. The Council had achieved nothing, spending their time looking for a way off the planet, and when that had been denied, refusing to hand over authority to anyone. It didn't matter how unlikely a victory was, they would share the spoils of defeat instead. Barked orders to the military produced nothing, since they had read the same reports hours before they reached the Council. They sat in sullen silence and waited for the countdown to end, for the end to begin. The clock ticked slowly down. 9 hours. Beacon began his plan, beginning with the navigation office. He knew exactly where this ship needed to go, and now the door was unguarded. A simple punch and it flew open. Surprise! The 6 crew stood stunned as a monster broke in, a creature as dark as the night outside. But the glint on its 2 blades caught their attention and held it. It spoke. "Today is a good day for you. Although probably quite short. I'm going to let you run. If you make it to the escape pods before I count to 10, you get to leave the ship. Isn't that nice of me?" It stood out of the way of the doorway and looked at them. "Run." The crew seemed to hesitate for a moment, and then Beacon raised his knives, and they bolted from the room. He pushed the door vaguely back into place and smiled. He hadn't lied. They could reach the escape pods if they moved quickly. He had programmed them to jettison in 20 minutes and they were all pointed directly into the local sun. But they would have time to feel the pain. Time to repent of what they had done. He planned the same for the rest of the crew. Today was a day of fire. The math was complicated, and not all the systems wanted to do what they were told. He had to break quite a lot of it before he was happy with the trajectory of the ship. The crew had left all their posts without logging off, which helped a lot. He double-checked and, now satisfied, then crushed all the ship's systems that could prevent it. He had whimsically called it his dead man walking strategy, and he was looking forward to seeing how it worked. Now for engineering and the engines. The hatch to engineering was a hell of a lot thicker than anything else on the ship, and he paused. He wanted that door. It was a nice door. He pulled up his transmission from the captain and modeled himself appropriately. The cameras were already his, so he simply knocked. The squinting creature that appeared on the screen seemed surprised to see him. "Sir, you are not supposed to be here. Like, ever. What can I do for you?" Beacon put on the same scared herbivore face the captain had used when he had been waiting for the Marines to save him, and whispered, "I'm bringing my guard here, and we will wait for the fleet to arrive. I've ordered us home, but the creature is interfering with transmissions. Please open the door." Behind him appeared the image of his armsman arriving and looking nervous. Nervous and heavily armed. The engineer was not a difficult man. Certainly not one to pick a fight with his own captain, but this was almost too much. Then the door began to slide open of its own accord even as the captain stumbled in. "Thank you. My men will stand guard outside." The door closed silently behind him. He began simply, wandering around the department and annoying the crew. He asked stupid questions and pretended not to understand the answers. He poked at things that made tails twitch and scales itch. He hit buttons that shouldn't be hit. He pulled levers that shouldn't be pulled. Finally, the chief engineer had had enough. "Sir, can you sit down? Something is wrong with the ship. Surely you have better things to do." Beacon sat down comfortably at the console. He had already accomplished all he wanted to do in this department, all that button pushing having done its job. He smiled at the engineer. "Honestly, I just wanted to see if I could carry it off. You creatures, you are such a dull evil. I wondered if I could send you to your reward without you even noticing, and here we are. Tell me, Chief, when you were powering the weapons that burned my world, did you ever ask why you were doing it?" As he spoke, his body got darker and bigger. The engineer stuttered. "What? Captain, wait, what are you? Oh, shit. I'm so sorry, we just stay here and take orders. I'm sorry." He already knew it wasn't going to help. Beacon pulled out a small weapon and nodded at the engineer. "Sorry isn't enough." He pulled out a pistol. "This one took a while to calibrate with your shields, but it should be a memorable moment. For me, anyway. Your weapons stole all the air on my world, and it wasn't pretty, so I thought you would like to see it firsthand." He smiled at the confused crew, some of whom were running for the unresponsive door. It was a nice door. "Ready?" He didn't wait, simply pointed the weapon at the exterior hull and fired. The hole was small, not more than 30 centimeters square, but it cut through every shield until it reached open space and vacuum. The atmosphere began to rush out as the crew and random objects were pulled towards the hole. He watched as the engineer realized what was about to happen. Beacon leaned forward and added, "Go fuck yourself." He sat and watched as men, equipment, and despair were dragged kicking and screaming into the small hole, no doubt smearing themselves all over the nice, clean space outside. He had been surprised how long some of these creatures could hold their breath, something to remember for the next time. Then he went back to the consoles and turned off all the stupid alarms and refined his earlier work. He wanted to be absolutely sure they got the full benefit of his lesson. He had debated staying on the ship, but this close to the sun, and with failing systems, he couldn't be sure that the rest of the fleet would get the transmission. He would have to watch this one alongside them. Perhaps he could give a running commentary. That could be entertaining. He expanded the hole in the ship and stepped back into the void. The captain was already a mess, barely out of the medbay and accompanied by 2 healers in case he needed to be dismissed for medical reasons. Or if he completely lost the plot again. "Sir, we have lost nav and engines. Engineering is not responding, showing a vacuum in the department. I have sent a security and repair section to both. Awaiting reports." The captain was not shaking. The ship must be quivering. He snapped at the bridge crew. "Stabilize the damn ship! This shaking is distracting." The crew looked at each other and pretended to adjust some settings. "Sir, yes, sir." One of his crew cursed and stood up, quickly moving to another station. He waved for support, and within a minute, the whole crew was desperately hitting their consoles and whispering to each other. The captain asked in a wearied voice, "What? What has the creature done to us now?" The second took a deep inhale and reviewed what the crew and screens were telling him. This was not going to be pretty. "Sir, the creature has changed our course. We will be approximately 3 million kilometers closer to the sun than permitted. He has also disabled our heat shields and slowed the ship to 1/3 speed." He tried to paint the picture. "Sir, we are going to slowly fall into the sun with no protection. I estimate it will take 9 hours before the situation is fatal to all crew. All escape pods have been jettisoned and our comms are shot. We are going to burn in here." Beneath his desk, he had already alerted security to lock down the ship and nodded at the healers to drag the crying captain from his post. He took the captain's console and skimmed through the 9 hours deadline. The creature had held the Haven of Fire for 9 hours. He had delayed the Citadel for roughly the same. It became clear when he realized that they had bombarded the human world for 9 hours. Shit. Beacon watched the ship fall into his carefully planned trajectory. He estimated, depending on how clever the crew was, they would begin to fall apart in an hour. In the meantime, he had been busy punching a direct feed to all the other fleet shipping that he could reach. The Consul of Grey was a frigate, just under 1,000 crew, and with a respectable battle record. Sharp, well-disciplined, and used to heavy odds, it had enjoyed a little planet burning even if the captain had seemed unhappy. He was a growly and bloody-minded scour, full of honor and regret. When his comms officer pushed his way past everyone to report an illegal stream being pushed into the system, he waved him in and listened. "The Messaclip is under attack." The crewman hesitated for a moment. "No, sir, the Messaclip is doomed. The human ghost has seized it and has sent it towards the local sun. They aren't the ones calling us. It's the creature. It wants us to watch." The captain seemed to grow older. "So it begins. The goddess is never going to forgive us." He pulled himself straight. "Can we rescue? Are we close enough?" The crewman shook his head. "Too far, and I'm not sure the crew would even obey the order. As I said, the Messaclip is doomed. No one is responding. I checked and the fleet is abandoning the system, and gossip says they are going to use a sun killer on the system." The captain dismissed the crewman and looked thoughtfully into the future. The council would fall for this, but there was always another council. Unless this wasn't the end, why just attack the fleet? Perhaps because the big guns were on their way somewhere else. One creature was paralyzing the fleet. What would a nation of them do? Another world of meat-eaters? He had despised the orders when he had received them, but he must be on a list somewhere. Another of those that had burned an innocent world. He scanned the list of the 1,000 worlds and picked one that might suit. He began watching the stream, watching a battleship fall apart and the burning begin. He didn't wait 9 hours. "All hands, new orders are sending us far into the 1,000 with little prospect of return. We will be making one stop in..." He checked the star map. 8 hours. Disembark if you wish." He pulled full ship control to his office and sealed the door. He was going to do the only sane thing and run. Inside the battleship, the temperature kept rising. It didn't matter what they did and how many men they sent. You can't fight a sun or kill a ghost. The crew heard rumors of a cooler spot and ran towards it. Issuing weapons to all crew merely turned it into a bloodbath. The heat sent some mad. Some literally burst into flame if they touched a wall. All sanity was lost until a low voice chirped into the comms. "Remember, the Citadel is just sitting there. Maybe you could escape on that." Beacon cackled at that one. To use that mess as bait, encouraging the murderers to murder better. He made sure the cameras covered the insanity that followed, as the crew slaughtered each other to reach the ship that only a few hours ago had been a horror. Pity that he already had a plan for that ship. But he wasn't going to be mean about it. In fact, it would save him a walk. He waited until the puking, bleeding survivors launched the ship and then made himself comfortable on the hull, listening. "It's done. We are out of the gravity well. Course set for the station. Goddess forgive us. How many did we kill to get here?" The older creature, now carrying no tags or rank, shook his head. "None. We killed none. They will be dead within the next few hours and their records with them. We were just lucky is all. Happened to be guarding this ship and fled when all else failed. What can they do to us that that creature hasn't already tried to do? You wanted to live, same as me." After an hour, one of the men, squirming with discomfort, had pulled off his biofiltered mask and endured the smell of cooking meat. What the fuck? "Sarge, is it getting hotter in here?" One glance at the grinning thing outside told them the truth. They hadn't escaped. Hell was taking them home. Fuck. Emergency broadcast. Senior rank's only Sunkiller failed. Unknown interference. No alien traces were found. Declaring emergency missing Sunkiller. Battleship Messaclip and Citadel recovered. No survivors. Creature. Unknown hostile entity is assumed to still be active. Rowan stood beside Silver Wisp as the timer ran down. She was almost sure he had a plan. Almost. She was mostly there to see what happened next. 4 kilometers below the surface of the Council world, the Council waited. Suddenly a dark force arrived. It walked to the stick holder, ripped it from his hands, and then tore his face apart. Fangs ripped at him as he fell, the screams filling the suddenly locked room. Then, an androgynous figure stood up. "Forgive me. I believe this is how you conduct diplomacy." "Perhaps he might need medical assistance?" All the attending staff that had been waiting, including several bodyguards and medics, ran in and saw the damage. They ignored the stranger and hauled the chairman away. The figure nodded at the support staff. "My apologies. I felt it would serve little purpose in killing them today." He seemed to solidify, becoming a metal biped, an ever-changing landscape of patterns instead of a face. "You declared war, and I am here to see you lose." He picked up the blood-soaked stick from the floor and threw it to a random councilman. "Here you go. Speak." The councilman caught the stick and, in a moment of fury, slammed it down. "You are new to us, an aberration. We have done you no evil." He looked at the blood on the speaking stick. "He had done you no wrong to die like this. Why do you speak of war?" Silver Wisp turned to his old face, his early days. Days in the forest as a child, days of innocence until the burning. The same face he had shown the seer. "You burned our children. You burned our green spaces. We are human and we are legion." He raised a hand and then a finger, carefully allowing them to watch as he touched the podium. "I will send you the terms of your surrender." He paused. "I see from your notes that Beacon has been busy. He will never stop. You probably shouldn't have killed his family. He isn't human anymore." Then the countdown reset, and Silver Wisp returned to himself. Rowan was waiting for him. "A little dramatic, wasn't it?" Silver Wisp looked at her as if she was from the darkest past, finally nodding. "Rowan, I was the one that poured the healing waters on your family. You have no idea of what I will do to these people." He seemed to grow taller, darker, and fiercer. "But many of them are about to die, and I am not sorry. I'm going to burn them out of space." He stopped for a moment. "You were not much more than a child at the burning. Go to the seer and tell him I permit you to see my memories. He can show you what war means to us. He said he was one of those damned humans. He said we burned their children. What the fuck have we done? That ship could kill us all in a day." The sudden crash surprised them as the podium collapsed. The place where the human had touched had burned a hole that had spread. Reluctantly, they looked around and saw the same breakdown spreading, small cracks that didn't seem to care if it was steel or plascrete, paper or wood. The human disease was burning through their chamber. This, then, was the countdown. 9 hours.